Hey guys, Lovey Freeman here, and today I got some more Hearts of Iron 4 Kaiserreich mod content for you. And today I want to talk a little bit about unit types and template design and whatnot. So I went to the console and I got myself some army experience and some researches, and to do a comparison, you got to pick a country that doesn't really have any flavor or anything like that. It's going to have national spirits that affect your stats, so you have a nice flat baseline for comparisons and to discuss about. So you think, what country in Kaiserreich mod was really unimportant and gets no love, right? And of course, it's going to be Hungary. Hungary is like the most unimportant generic country, and you can see they even got this basic bitch focus tree, even though the Balkans just got like an update and they're like a significant player. So it pretty much confirmed Hungary doesn't matter. So we can use them as our baseline. They don't have anything special about them except for a couple national spirits there that don't affect combat. So there we go. So what I've done here is I've gone here and I've done some researches, and I've got up to the 1941 tech tier for like all the relevant, land-based combat stuff for support companies, tanks, so on and so forth, artillery, and no land doctrine. So this is like a base comparison. And I also did not research the special forces like branch upgrades. I do have the Mountaineers and Marines and Paratroopers technologies, but not the branch upgrades. So keep that in mind. That's the basis that we're going for here. So when you're looking at designing your templates and the different battalion stats and whatnot, it's important to kind of understand the basics about what those stats are. So you got base stats and you got combat stats. Base stats, you got max speed, and the max speed will be capped by the slowest battalion in your division. So if you stick like a really fast light tank up with a slow infantry unit, then you're getting no benefit from the speed of that light tank. Hit points is how much damage you can take before your unit's destroyed, and when you take hit point damage, your equipment and manpower losses are prorated versus your equipment and manpower to your hit points. So if you have low hit points and a lot of manpower and equipment, you're going to take a lot of losses for every point of damage you suffer. But if you have not that much equipment and not that much manpower, but a whole bunch of hit points, then you're not going to take not as much losses, right? So having a large amount of hit points is nice to protect really expensive equipment if that's what you're going for. Hit points is some stat, so the more stuff you throw in your unit, the higher the hit points you're going to have. Organization is how much organization damage you can take before your unit has to fall back. And usually the goal in Hearts of Iron 4 for your combats is you're trying to deorg your opponent. That makes them fall back, they lose the fight, and then you take the tile, right? That's usually what you're trying to accomplish. Destroying someone with hit point damage is pretty rare. It almost never happens. Usually it's going to be you're forcing them to fall back, and if you get a unit kill, it's from an overrun. So organization is pretty important for determining how long you can stay in the fight. Recovery rate is an adder onto your base organization recovery, and the higher the recovery rate you have, the more organization you're going to recover when you're done in combat. So more recovery rate means you recover faster, you can get back in the fight faster. Reconnaissance you get from Recon companies, and when you look at your combat bubbles there, whichever general is going to have the higher reconnaissance scores and get a bonus to his initiative, not to be confused with the initiative stat. And whichever general has the initiative is going to pick their combat tactic last, and they'll have a higher chance of picking a counter tactic in comparison to the general that does not. So having the initiative is nice, and tactics are a little bit random number guides, but if you do get to counter the other guy's tactic, that could be a pretty nice swing for the period where that tactic is countered. Suppression is only useful for the resistance mechanic, and you want your whatever unit you're using for your garrison template to have a high suppression or at least a decent suppression to cost ratio. Weight is how many convoys it's going to take to move this thing around and to do naval invasions. Supply use is how much supply you consume. That's pretty straightforward. Reliability is how likely you are to have your equipment break to attrition. So some things you can get a designer that'll increase the reliability of your equipment type, and if you have a armor or tank variants, you can upgrade your reliability for that. And I believe the rule is if you have around 95% reliability, then you're going to get the lowest possible attrition anyways. But you would get this from maintenance companies for most things, and also I mentioned previously, if you have a designer or a variant, you can up your reliability for those specific pieces of equipment. Trickleback is what percentage of your casualties will get returned to your manpower pool, and you get that from field hospitals. field hospitals are like really expensive though, so you'd have to be in like a pretty dire situation to want to consider issuing field hospitals en masse to preserve that. Experience loss, again, this will help mitigate the loss of experience when you take casualties. So if you have like a tank unit or an important attacking unit that you want to keep at veteran status, then you could put a field hospital in there to slow that experience drain. And again, same problems with field hospitals; those are real expensive. So those are your base stats, and like usually the things that are going to have the highest base stats are your infantry and infantry-like battalions. So like infantry, trucks, mech, special forces, that sort of thing. Those will give you like your decent base stats that you have for your unit. And some of the other units will have like a little bit of base stats too, but mostly like when you're picking infantry or mechanized or motorized or something, putting them in your templates because you want to have decent base stats. Things like tanks are going to have pretty low base stats, and like the artillery and like self-propelled guns and stuff like that have like extremely low base stats. And like a lot of these things are like average stats, like organization, recovery rate, and hit points is additive. So like the more like really expensive tanks and artillery and stuff you throw on your unit, like the lower your base stats are going to be. So that's kind of the reason why you pick infantry, and they're important to have in your division, even though they have like poor combat stats, as you'll see in comparison in a minute here. So combat stats, and again, like usually you'd want to get these from like your line artillery and your tanks and like that sort of thing. And those are going to be like your attack, your defense, your breakthrough, your armor, and your piercing. So soft attack is an additive stat. The more soft attack you have in your unit, the higher it's going to be. The more battalions you have in your unit, the higher it's going to be. Same thing with hard attack. Air attack you're going to get from anti-air, and that's going to do damage to incoming airplanes and also reduce air superiority penalties. Defense and breakthrough your defensive stats, and they're also additive. So your defense is going to go up the more battalions you have. Armor and piercing are, they're a little bit interesting. So armor is going to be, if I remember correctly, it's 30% of your highest armored battalion's armor, and then the remaining 70% is the weighted average of the other battalions. And piercing is the same way, except it's a 40-60 split, if I remember correctly. So it's easy to get like a spike of armor by throwing in like one heavily armored unit, but to go beyond that, it's a lot more intensive because the rest of the stat is an average. So you have to have like your division mostly consisting of armored stuff to increase your armor appreciably beyond that. Kind of same thing with piercing. If you need high piercing, then you get that initial spike by throwing in like a support artillery or a unit of line artillery. But to go beyond that, you have to like really invest heavily into the piercing stat to get like really high piercing. Initiative is you're going to get that from your signals company, and that's going to improve your unit's planning speed. It's going to help them plan faster, and it's also going to increase their reinforce rates. Like if they're entering and already going on combat, they'll have a higher chance of every hour of making their reinforce roll to enter the combat, not just staying in reserves. Entrenchment you can get from engineers, and the higher entrenchment you have, the better stats you'll have for being entrenched. And that accumulates over time when you're doing nothing, and I believe it's 2% attack and defense per point of entrenchment you've accumulated. Equipment capture ratio is a percentage of equipment that you can steal from the enemy that they've lost in combat. So if you're in a position like you're defending, you have like pretty poor industry or something like that, and you've got a maintenance company, and the enemy wants to grind your position, and they lose a whole bunch of equipment in combat losses, then you can steal a portion of that equipment. And that can help if you're poor. You can steal quite a few guns from them if they're especially grinding into you a lot with weak units. So that's okay. And usually that's not the reason why you take maintenance companies. Like you take maintenance companies for the reliability to protect your equipment from attrition, but it does exist, and you can also get that from the scavenger general trait. Combat width. So every combat in HOI4 is going to have like an assigned combat width, and that's going to depend on your terrain, your tactics, and like how many directions you're attacking from. And I think that's about it. I think there might be a couple other things. There are a few doctrine choices in mass assault that will reduce this stat, but that's not going to affect it on the battlefield. And combat width will go in like multiples of 40. So your base combat is going to have a combat width of 80. And if you attack from an additional direction, you're going to get an additional 40 combat width, and another direction, you get another 40, and so on and so forth. And some tactics will cut combat width by 50%. Like if you're attacking over a river and you get that god-awful bridge tactic that cuts your combat width in half, and if you're only attacking from one tile, then you're down to 40 combat width. So if you're over combat width, like if you have like two 42 width divisions fighting in an 80 width combat, you're 4 combat width over, you're going to start to accumulate an over combat width penalty. And because of that, the usual wisdom for template design is you want to make sure that your combat width is going to always be a multiple that fits into 40. So 10, 20, and 40 are usually what you want to build to. And there are a couple other strategies that go out there. You want to go with like maybe 26, and then you can have higher stats in your units, and you're only losing 2 combat width in the standard width 80 combat, and so on and so forth. So like there are a couple other ideas out there. But standard, you want to build 10, 20, and 40, and the reason is that you can fit into whatever width combat occurs without taking a penalty. So the way combat works in Hearts of Iron 4 is like when you go in, you're going to have your attack stat, and how many attacks you get is going to be based off your soft attack, your hard attack, and whatever your attacking's hardness. So your total attack value is prorated between hard and soft attack in the ratio of the enemy's hardness. So if you have like an enemy that's 50% hard, your total attack would be 50% of your soft attack and 50% of your hard attack. So that's an important concept to get. So the AI usually doesn't build a whole lot of hard units, so soft attack is kind of usually far more important than hard attack in single player. And when you attack a unit, they're going to resist your attacks with their defensive statistic. So defense on the defense is your defensive stat, and breakthrough on attack is your defensive stat. So if you're attacking into someone, you're going to resist their attacks with your breakthrough. If someone's attacking you, you're going to resist their attacks with your defense. And the way that kind of game works is that every point of attack that's blocked by defense has like, I think it's like a 0.1 chance to do damage, and any point of attack over that has a 0.4 chance to do damage. So if you have like 100 defense and the opponent has 101 attack, then the first 100 points are going to have 0.1 chance to do damage, and the last point that's above your defense is going to have a 0.4 chance. So there is a threshold, right? And if you have enough defense to block everything, like if you have one more point of defense and they have attacks, then that's just as good as having 1,000 points more, right? As long as you block everything, you block everything. So like there's some diminishing returns to have, and you can kind of waste your defense and your breakthrough by having them too high. On the other hand, more attacks is like always going to be good. Whether they're blocked or not, you're always getting value for it. So if you have attacks and you can get like even like a little bit above their defense or their breakthrough, then that can count for like a disproportionate amount, because every point you exceed by is 4 times more effective. So you'll see in a minute, like this is like an infantry unit here that we're looking at when I'm explaining these stats, and you'll see like their breakthrough is a lot lower than their defense, and their attack is lower than their defense, but the attack is like twice as high as the breakthrough. So on infantry and infantry combat, like you can look at this and see pretty obviously infantry has a pretty significant defender's advantage, and you're going to have to pull some tricks to overcome that if you're going to try to push an opposing infantry unit out with an infantry unit of your own that's similar. The other important stat is armor and piercing. So like it kind of mentions here in this tooltip, right? Like if you have armor bonus, you're gonna take half damage to organization and hit point damage, right? So right away damage cut in half, and additionally you're gonna inflict an additional approximate 40% organization damage on the person you're attacking. So having an armor bonus will substantially increase the effectiveness of your unit in combat. And you'll have that as long as the opponent's piercing is lower than your armor. If whatever you're attacking or whatever is attacking you has a piercing that's equal to or higher than your armor, then you get no bonus. So it's all or nothing. Either you have the armor bonus or you don't. So if you invested a whole lot into armor and you built these light tanks and you put a lot of thought into that and industry into that, and then your opponent has anti-tank that pierces you, then you're like pretty sad about that. That sucks a lot. So again, with the AI, like the AI doesn't really build like really armored units, and like the tank units they do build, they don't tend to supply properly with equipment, so they're usually like massively under strength. And conversely, like if you build a decent tank unit, the AI is not going to build a anti-tank heavy enough template to like really stop you. This game matters significantly much less in single player than it does in multiplayer. If you build you can build some pretty brain dead tank templates and like repeat those over and over, and you'll be absolutely fine in single player. It's not a big deal. So those are like your combat basics that you want to keep in mind when we look at these different battalion stats. So first up, we'll go through the usual base stat units over here, and those are going to be your helmets, which we just kind of talked about over there. So 25 HP, 60 orb, recovery rate 0.3, and the rest of the stuff's not really usually that relevant for combat. Soft attack 9.9, hard attack 1.5, defense 32.2, and breakthrough 4.6 with 5 piercing, so 87 cost. So this costs you 1,500 manpower and 150 infantry equipment. So what you're going to notice is like all these units here are like pretty similar. The leg infantry, like the helmet version, has no terrain adjusters. So the horse unit in comparison is going to have like some minor terrain adjusters, but they're there. Like you're going to take some penalties in certain terrain types, your movement and your attack, and they're also like really bad at amphibious. Like don't use Calvary for amphibious. It's a bit silly. And also they have similar stats to the infantry for their base stats, except that you're going to get higher organization for Calvary. Same soft attack. You have a little bit less defense and breakthrough, but again, these are similar stats. And your main differences are you're slightly faster at 6.4 kilometers per hour compared to infantry's 4, and you use more infantry equipment and supply. And your cost, accordingly, is slightly higher. Trucks again, same base stats as your infantry, except they use a bit more supply and they're a bit heavier. And also the same combat stats. The difference with the trucks, though, is obviously they have trucks, so they're significantly faster at 12 kilometers per hour, and they come with like a bit harsher terrain modifiers for attack, and like some really rough terrain modifiers for movement. So like a truck in a forest is only going half speed. Truck in the jungle is only going half speed. And you'll notice the horse doesn't have any negative modifiers for those terrain types. So if you're going to be fighting in Africa or something like that, and like some people will say if you're trying to go Gorings or outfield motorized because it's faster, but if you look at Africa, most of this terrain that you're concerned about because it's so large and you have to cover such a large area, most of it's jungles and forests, and building motorized is like pretty pointless in that situation because you're not going to get that speed anyways. You might as well have just built cavalry. And unfortunately, motorized, I think their like base reliability is like 80%. Let's say here. That's yeah. I don't think it says there. But your base reliability is like you're going to break a lot of trucks, and those like attrition is going to be expensive, and then also you're going to burn fuel for that. And like if you're going to take a 50% movement hit in your trucks, like just build horses. It's pretty wasteful otherwise, right? Trucks, the other thing to note about them too, more manpower usage, 1,800 instead of 1,500 for the trucks, and also hardness 20%, and the 20% because in 1941 you get the first mech upgrade, which has a plus 100% hardness bonus to your trucks. And if you're going to use trucks in your armor units at all, then definitely you want to get that bonus. Even if you're not going to build on your mech, just get this bonus. It'll, the extra hardness will go a long ways there, and you'll take less damage because of it. So, you don't necessarily have to get that ahead of time, but when 1940 rolls around, if you're going to use trucks in your tank units, and just get the upgrade. Mechanized. So mechanized, kind of like the trucks there. Trucks, also I should note, 212 cost compared to like the 87 and 104 cost for horses. So like now you're starting to get into the significantly more expensive range for your base stats, and also you're paying rubber for the tires. Mech is like an obnoxious 487 production cost for a mech unit, and also you're still going to have to pay that rubber tax, and they're going to be a little bit more fuel intensive and supply intensive than your trucks. And mech also will have like the same general base stats as like your other infantry units will. They're going to have slightly higher hard attack and soft attack. Mech does come with armor 10 and piercing 16 though. So like if you're trying to, and again, because after your spike, those stats are based on your average. So if you're trying to build a unit that has high armor and high piercing, then you're better off trying to use Mech as your filler than you are any other unit type. Mech also comes with like a little bit better breakthrough and twice the defense. So like a really tough unit to shift on the defense. Especially if you can't pierce them. Mech speed 8, so again, faster than the horses, slower than trucks. And 8's kind of like a fugly number because 8 is faster than a heavy tank at this tier. So your heavy tank will slow your mech down, so your mech speed is wasted. But 8 is also slower than medium tanks, which are at 9 kilometers per hour this tier, so they also drag your medium tanks a bit down. So that's a bit of a bummer. But once you get to the improved mechanized models, they start to go 10 kilometers per hour and above, so they can keep up with the medium tanks, and you can even upgrade the engine on your medium tank if you wanted to, and that would allow you not to waste any of your speed. The other thing to note about mechanized is mechanized, like the infantry, have very few movement penalties in different terrain types. You only have a penalty for rivers. So if you needed a unit that moves fast in those jungle terrains, like we're talking about, like if you're in Africa or something, you got like a long distance to cover, you want to go fast, Mech will get you that. Mech has no movement speed modifiers in jungle. You still go your 8 kilometers per hour or 10 kilometers per hour if you're a higher tier. The problem with Mech though is it has the worst terrain attack modifiers out of all the base stat unit types. So keep that in mind. Mech will move fast and they'll defend really well in rough terrain, but your attack will suffer a little bit for it. And then after that, you get into like your crunch, like your combat stat units. So like first up, you got your line artillery. Line artillery will cost you tungsten, but compared to like an infantry unit for combat width, and line artillery is a 3 combat width, so the comparison would be 2 artillery against 3 infantry units for the stat comparison, right? So your manpower is going to be lower. You're going to have quite a bit higher soft attack. But the rest of your stats are like either worse or similar to infantry, and of course your base stats are much lower, right? So you're going to reduce your base stats, but you're going to trade that for attack and less manpower, but you cost tungsten. And you do have some terrain penalties, but for like most of the things that you're going to use artillery for, like a 7.2 or a 14.4, like your artillery is like in a significantly lower proportion than your base stat units. So your terrain modifiers wind up working out to be like not really all that significant, but they're there. So artillery is the crunch stat for that is soft attack. One thing to note though, that artillery requires 36 artillery units for a line unit at 144 production cost, and it's going to get you 39 soft attack. But the support artillery unit, this is going to get you 27 soft attack at 48 production cost with only 12 units. So support artillery is considerably more cost effective than line artillery. And just keep that in mind. Like if you can't build a whole bunch of artillery, like the most cost effective way to use the pieces that you make is to use them as support artillery and not as line artillery. The other support units kind of follow the same template, like they are more cost effective to use them as support, but it's not as obnoxious as with the artillery. So rocket artillery is more or less like the same bag of tricks as normal artillery. Your soft attack will be a little bit lower, your breakthrough is a bit higher, your defense is a bit lower, and you get a 10% attack bonus against forts. So, production cost is the same. The problem with rocket artillery, though, is to get rocket artillery, you got to come over to the engineering tab. You have to get your rocket engines, and then you have to go to your artillery tab and you have to research rocket artillery, and then you're gonna have to get the upgrades for that as well, right? And if you're using artillery in addition to rocket artillery, that's like a lot of research you have to do, plus the research over here for the rockets. The benefit for the rocket artillery though is you do get to kind of double dip on your bonuses because like the rocket engine upgrades will increase the soft attack of rocket artillery. So there's that. kind of like I think like probably the most like common reason that you would want to make rocket artillery is because like if you look at the superior firepower doctrine, if you go down integrated support, which is like usually the way you want to go, these are a lot better benefits, and like line artillery, like in general, I don't think is all that strong. But if you come down on integrated support, you're going to get soft attack plus 25%, two bonuses of 25% for your support companies. And you can only have one support artillery in a unit. But if you were going that route, you can kind of double dip by having one support artillery and one support rocket artillery, right? And when you've got that buff from superior firepower, you can get like for a pretty cost-effective amount, you can like really increase the soft attack potential of your unit if you're willing to spend the research on getting the rocket artillery in addition to your normal artillery. It's like that's rocket artillery. Like I don't know, even with the 10% bonus on this, like for the extra 3-point something attack, it's like that's still not really on the same. Like I mean, it's still worse than line or like the regular artillery. So like, I don't know. You do get the extra upgrades for it. Kind of a meme though, in my opinion. Anti-tank is like you put this in a unit if you're looking for hard attack and you're looking for piercing. And again, because I think this is like based on like these are more heavily weighted than the support company. So if you splash a line artillery, you'll get more than splashing with a support anti-tank. If you're looking for your piercing stat, like if you go down over here, we have like I don't know, where's the 10-0 template? Yeah. So if you splash the support anti-tank, you'll get piercing 47.9, and if you splash a line anti-tank, you're going to get piercing 53.8. And it is more expensive to get the line artillery, but again, because piercing is sort of like all or nothing, when you're making your splashes like that to up the piercing of your unit, maybe you want to put in 2 line artillery for that 2 combat width in replace of an infantry unit than instead of a support artillery. But if one support artillery is going to be good enough to pierce something, then yeah, sure, make a I call them artillery, but if one support anti-tank is going to be enough to get you past the piercing threshold, then yeah, obviously you would pick support instead of line. Also of note, the anti-tank is a 1 combat width battalion. Anti-air is going to get you air attack for your combat stats. It's going to get you a little bit of hard attack, a little bit of soft attack, and it also gives you like a moderate amount of piercing. So. And again, this is 150 production cost for 30 air attack, and if you look at the support anti-air, it's going to be 100 production cost for 25 air attack. So it's a bit more cost efficient to get the support company. And then you'd have like the mechanized or the motorized versions of these are basically the same thing, except you also pay for the trucks, and you're going to wind up with the usual things associated with having trucks instead of infantry in your units. So next up you have your special forces. Special forces are again like a base stat unit. You're going to pick these and they're going to fulfill like your base stat requirement. Special forces usually will have like a significantly higher organization, like 75 to 60 in comparison with your non-special force units. They also usually have like slightly better soft attack and breakthrough, but worse hit points. The real reason why these guys are interesting, though, is because they have terrain mitigation, right? You're going to get bonuses for rivers, marshes, and amphibious. And these are the things that are going to slow down your offensive units a lot of the time, because those terrain penalties can be like pretty harsh, right? So if you have like your tank units and you're stuck on a river line, what you can do is like take your trucks out and replace them with anchors, and that's going to give you a bonus for attacking across rivers. Well, it won't give you a bonus, but it'll drastically reduce the penalty for attacking over the rivers. Or the same thing with a naval invasion. Like, your tanks are having a problem doing naval invasion. They're getting stuck. Their stats are in the single digits. It's horrible. You pull your trucks out, you replace them with anchors, and that's going to fix that problem for you. Mountaineer is kind of like the same bag of tricks of the Marines, with the exception that these guys are also going to have... these guys are going to be good for hills and mountains instead of the amphibious and rivers and stuff like that. And one other thing to note about like the Marines and also the Paratroopers there is a general trait that will give you out of supply like an extra 10 days out of supply. I think it's like 240 hours. amphibious for Marines, and paratrooper for paratroopers. So if you're trying to do memey things and go for cutoffs and stuff like that, then like using a Marine division or a paratrooper division, and if you have a general with that ability, can let you like be more effective while out of supply because you'll have the extra supply grace. So that would be like another reason you would consider, like if you want to just send like 10 anchors across and like do a cutoff like somewhere in Egypt. That's just like a cheap unit that only costs guns. Like you could just do like a meme naval invasion. Like you're fighting in Libya, take this port here, you take this port over here, and then you send a couple anchors over here and just like cut them off, right? And then you got 10 days where these guys are going to be out of supply, right? These will last more out of supply than these guys will, and then you might be able to use that advantage to push. And if you have like a logistics wizard field marshal behind that sort of thing, then if you push out a bit with your anchors, you could even build your own port over here. If you have you have 15 days from logistic wizard, 10 days supply grace from that general trait, and then like 48 based, right? So it's like that's more than enough time to build a port. It's like that's like a pretty big meme you can pull. And special forces allow you to do that because of those general traits. Paratroopers, like they don't do terrain mitigation, but they have strategic mobility, so you could use those to try and meme victory points from the AI. If they're not garrisoning them, then you can like try and seize their victory points, like force capitulation that way. Or if you're having a problem naval invading or something, maybe you could try doing that as a distraction. Or if you want to deny resources to the enemy, like you could drop those somewhere, like where their oil or their steel or their tungsten or their rubber is, and try and mess up their production. Stuff like that. Again, like things like that, like when I'm talking about like doing the meme operations there, like those are like pretty risky. So like those templates probably you just want to keep cheap. Maybe like 10 or 20 combat width of like just paratroopers or like just Marines. But those are those things. Paratroopers, like yeah, they are a base stat unit, but because they're doing paradropping, probably you're not using them to shore up stats for other things. So they are unique in that respect. I don't use paratroopers a whole lot though, so you might want to seek advice about them elsewhere. The Amtrak I do have like kind of a soft spot for. I find it to be a particularly nice unit to have, even if it does take a bunch of research. And the Amtrak is basically like a slightly worse mechanized model. It's like a little bit slower. The improved Amtrak is 10 kilometers per hour, just like the mech though. So if you get to the improved Amtrak tier, that's like real nice to have, especially for your medium tanks. But they have slightly worse stats than a mech unit does. But the Amtrak does have the hardness of the mech. It's got the armor of the mech. It's got the piercing of the mech. And it's got absolutely no negative terrain movement modifiers, even on the rivers, which is extremely nice. And then also, just like the Marines, you're going to get that bonus attack for amphibious, river, and marsh. So putting these instead of motorized or mechanized in your tank units, like will still keep them moving reasonably fast. Like on the heavies, it won't slow them down at all. Or if you've got the improved Amtrak, then it won't slow the mediums down at all. So you'll keep them moving a lot faster than they would with motorized. And also, it'll help them get over rivers a bit better. And it'll make them significantly more effective at making naval invasions. And Amtraks with tanks is probably the best unit in the game for trying to do a naval invasion to like bully a unit off of a port. You're gonna have a lot easier time with that, because a tank unit with Amtraks is gonna have reasonable breakthrough and it's gonna have armor. In comparison, if you try to do it with just basic Marines over here, and the Marines, they get these bonuses, yeah, sure, but you still have the same problems with like the low armor and the low breakthrough that infantry do, which makes them bad at attacking. That's your special forces. Motorized rocket artillery. So this thing again, like kind of a meme. It's like rocket artillery strapped on the back of a truck. Like I'm not even sure what the difference is between like this thing and the towed rocket artillery. I think it might just be basically exactly. It seems like it's like pretty much the same cost. It might be a little bit more attack than this stuff over here. Yeah, I think it is. 269, 277. So like I don't know. I guess if you paid the extra research, it's a bit better than the truck run rocket artillery. But still, like look at the like compared to like motorized artillery over here, this stuff is 269 cost, so it's cheaper. And the soft attack is 39 versus 41. It's like basically the same, right? Basically the same, and it's not going to cost you those extra research slots. So I'm not sure why you would ever want to go through the trouble to get the research to actually build this stuff. I guess maybe if you're attacking a fort, it's slightly better, but I don't know. For me, I pretty much always pass on the motorized rocket artillery. It doesn't really seem worth it to me to get. All right, so now you get into your tank units. So your line tanks do bring to the table some base stats. In comparison to like these other units that we're looking for your combat stats that you're going to get. Like these give you practically nothing in the base stats category. And your tanks aren't great compared to your base stat units like your infantry and whatnot. But they do give you something, right? You have Org 10, you get recovery rate 0.3, so like tanks don't lower your recovery rate. And you get a little bit of hit points. But tanks also, you're going to get more soft attack than most of your other base units. Not as much as like your artillery, but pretty similar. So you figure, 2 of these artillery, that would be like 78, and 3 of these would be 66. Like, I mean, they're not like that far behind in the attacks per combat width, and this is even the light tank. But the reason that you take tanks is obviously the combat stat you're looking for is breakthrough and armor. And tanks also usually have decent piercing as well, particularly the heavy tank. And so like there's not a whole lot in the game that has decent breakthrough except for tanks. So if you're trying to attack something and you don't want to be taking a whole bunch of damage doing it, and like if you remember we talked about earlier in the video, soft attacks, if they exceed your breakthrough, are going to be 4 times more effective for the attacks that are above that threshold than ones that don't. So you want to have breakthrough on your attacking unit. It's going to help you take significantly less damage, and tanks bring that to the table. And that's primarily the reason why you build them. And then of course they have armor as well. Downsides to tanks, like they are expensive. So you notice like a tank unit on the light tank tier, which is the cheapest one, is 600 versus the infantry unit at 87, right? Or even a truck at 212. So like per combat width, tanks are very industrial cost intensive. And also they tend to have some pretty harsh modifiers. The light tank I think has like the lowest modifiers to attack. And it kind of goes up. Like medium tank is going to have harsher modifiers than light tank, and heavy tank is going to have harsher modifiers than medium tank. Movement I think is about the same. Tanks are like pretty slow in forests. And again, because those are average stats, you can mitigate this by using something that's not so in forests, like a Calvary or a mechanized or an Amtrak. But putting motorized with tanks is going to slow them down even worse in those terrain types, so keep that in mind. So this is your light tank. The light tank has high speed, but it also has comparatively low armor and piercing. Medium tank, kind of same bag of tricks. You're going to have higher amount of armor and piercing compared to the light tank, significantly higher armor. And soft attack, you do have higher soft attack, and it's kind of almost in proportion. Like you have higher soft attack than the light tank, but like not by like a huge margin. And you are more expensive. And then it's like this is like negative 30 in a forest, and the light tank is like negative 20, right? So you do have harsher terrain penalties. And then the heavy tank has slightly higher soft attack than the medium. But if you notice down here, it's going to have like significantly higher hard attack, significantly higher armor, and significantly higher piercing. And like across the 3, you have breakthrough 46, breakthrough 51, breakthrough 52. So like the breakthrough stat, like in the soft attack, is kind of like it doesn't really matter what type of tank you're building; they'll all like bring that to the table. But as you go up in the tier, you're getting that armor and you're getting that piercing. And the heavy tank particularly brings hard attack to the table. Heavy tank also has an attack bonus against forts. Kind of what you'll notice here though is like when you pick the heavy tank is really expensive compared to the medium tank, but doesn't have all that much more soft attack. So when you're pushing into AI units and you're like, is the AI unit going to be able to pierce medium tanks if you build your division properly? Probably not, right? And the heavy tank is also slower than the medium tank, So like, is it really worth it to build heavies? And I think heavies do have their place, right? And like you saw, we used heavies in the German playthrough that I did. So like for me, when you're looking at your tank type, right? Like one of the major considerations you're going to have is like, what resources am I going to have to actually build these units? So like when we're playing as Commune of France, we had like a pretty easy supply of tungsten over here in Portugal. So build medium tanks, no problem, right? And as Germany, like I said, I was concerned about Russia cutting us off in Persia, or in the Ottomans over here and giving us problems with potentially getting cut off if Russia pushes down here. But you have chromium in the Balkans, right? So you're not going to be able to trade through the Commune of France as Germany to reach this tungsten, but you can have land trade for chromium. So then in that case, heavy tanks are chromium, medium tanks are tungsten. So if you build heavy tanks, then you're going to have more secure access to your resources, and that can count for a lot. Like your production goes like right in the shitter if you can't protect your convoys and you have to do overseas trade, and you have to have those convoys in the first place to even consider that as an option. So in particularly if you have like a domestic supply of that resource, like for the Ottomans over here, you have like tons of chromium, so sure, you build heavy tanks, you don't have to trade for it. And so when you look at this cost over here, that also has to be within the context of, yeah, sure, this might cost more, but if I'm building these and I have to trade for tungsten, I'm also paying the civilian factory tax to get that tungsten in, plus convoys if it's overseas, right? Well, that's something else you got to consider when you're picking your tank design. And the other thing too with the tanks, like when you're picking which type of tank you want to build, is also you got to consider your research bonuses. So if you only get one research bonus for tanks, then if you go with heavies, you can go from here to here with your one research bonus, and get this tank and be building that for the Weltkrieg. But if you only have one research bonus, like that's only going to get you from here to here. So like you're only at 1939 tier, or you have to hard rush and like with no bonus this tank and use your bonus to get to here, in which case it'd be delayed. So if you only have one bonus, like usually it's a more efficient use of that bonus to go with heavies. If you have two bonuses, you can go from here to here, and that's fine. And because they're more cost effective for soft attack, if you have that and tungsten, then maybe medium tanks makes a lot of sense to build. But those are the considerations, right? And the other thing is like sometimes the AI will build anti-tank. Like you'll see them with something silly like this, where they stuck a line anti-tank and supporting anti-tank, and this will get you 59.9 piercing. And in order to actually not be pierced by that, like once your tank's no longer ahead of time, the AI is kind of caught up, right? If you look at like a 12-8 medium tank, like this will be pierced by that. And like to kind of remedy that problem, you might have to build more medium tanks and increase your tank to mech ratio, or throw mech in there or motorized, and like so this will stop your piercing problems, but it's also going to close the gap in production cost on a division level compared to the heavy tanks. So that is something else to consider. So like that's pretty much it for tanks, right? You're getting that for your breakthrough. They have like pretty good soft attack comparatively, even if it is expensive, right? Like you're not that much far behind artillery in terms of attacks per combat width. I think the heavy tank you might actually get more. I believe you do get more with the heavy tank per combat width than you do with artillery. But again, it is a lot more expensive for that combat stat. The reason why you're taking these is for breakthrough and armor. And then you have your armor variants, right? So you have light, SP, anti-air, medium, and heavy. So the variants are like a little bit weirder. Like these, like if you notice, your critical stat being your air attack, 32, 32, 33. So like they're all similar. If you're not worried about being pierced by splashing one of these things in there, like throwing a light into a medium, it's going to lower your average armor. So you're going to take a little bit of a hit for that. But if you're not worried about that and the AI is not piercing you, or the AI is piercing you regardless of what you're doing, and you're just going to get pierced and you have to take it, then you might as well just build whatever is most efficient if you have the tech for it. And AA is like a little bit weird because medium SPAA is actually cheaper than light SPAA. Go figure, right? And that's because medium is a 12 units attack, and medium is a 12 units, and light is a 15 units per battalion. So, yeah, that's a bit odd, but it's there. And then, heavy is obviously going to be more expensive, but you get the armor, better armor. With the variants, like aside from the tank destroyers are going to have full armor, like 110, but the artillery and the AA will have lower armor values than the parent. So keep that in mind. Variants are also cheaper than just building the tank, and the variants have a negligible breakthrough, unlike on all of them. So you can get armor cheaper. Like if you want to splash a heavy tank destroyer into like your template, make a Space Marine unit, you'll get cheap armor spike by throwing in a heavy tank destroyer, but it's not going to get you any breakthrough. So keep that in mind. So with the anti-air, like if you're worried about not having air superiority, air superiority is like really bad for tanks if the enemy has air superiority. That like negates their speed advantage by slowing them down. And the things that protect tanks from damage in land combat, like your hardness and your breakthrough, CAS doesn't care about any of that shit. They'll just bomb you directly, right? So if you have like a really expensive tank unit and the enemy has lots of CAS and you have no anti-air to block them, and you don't have air superiority, you don't have fighters to contest, then you're going to take like a lot of damage. You're going to lose a lot of expensive equipment. It's going to feel really bad. So if you don't think you're going to have air superiority, then you're going to want to build anti-air. Artillery, so you notice again, like the light SP artillery compared to the other variants, like this is 46, this is 50 soft attack, right? So light SPG, if you're looking at just soft attack per cost, is like an extremely cost-effective unit. And the medium is what it is, and the heavy has like quite a huge soft attack number compared to the other ones. Excuse me. So if you notice, like, the AA, that they were all pretty much the same anti-air attack, but for this, like, per combat, what the heavy SPG is, like, significantly better in the soft attack stat. And in fact, like, if you're looking at splashing SPGs into your armor unit, like a heavy tank unit with 2 heavy SPGs in it is going to have a much higher increase in soft attack than splashing SPGs into medium or light. Like a light tank, 3 light tanks is going to have, like 3 light tanks is going to have 66 soft attack for 6 combat width, and 2 light SPGs is going to have 92. So like a 30% increase, whereas I think 2 heavy tanks over here, or 3 heavy tanks over there, that's going to have 81, and then your heavy SP artillery is going to have like almost 150, right? So big difference with the heavies, not as much as the lights or the mediums. And then the tank destroyers, again, like tank destroyers are going for the piercing and the hard attack, and piercing is like kind of all or nothing. So like if you have the choice, probably you'd want to get the heavy tank destroyer. But if you have to make do with mediums or lights, you can do that. Right, but even then, like even though the 99 to 110 doesn't seem like a big difference because it is all or nothing, you want as much of that piercing as you can get. And again, with the tank destroyers, their armor is like the full armor from the parent. It doesn't get reduced. These are 2 combat width. The SPGs are 3 combat width, and your AA is 1 combat width. So the thing to note about the variants, right, and when you're planning out your division design and what you want to build, is you can convert, like if you look at your tech tree. So if you have if you have light tank 2s that you built for like volunteers or whatever when you're on the medium tank path, if you built a bunch of light tank 2 and you're in 1941 or whatnot and you want to expand your armor units, what you can do is like research light tank 3. Research light SPG 3 or light AA 3, and like we said previously, like light SPG 3 is like light SPGs in general, like pretty cost effective, right? And if you had all these lying around anyways, you can convert your existing stockpile of light tank 2s into SPG 3s with equipment conversion, right? It's like you can go to your production tab and pick your light SPG, and then click the box to convert from stockpile, and you'll get a production cost reduction for the ones that you convert. It's cheaper to convert than to build new, and you can turn your stockpile into light SP artillery 3, and then you could then go and make a unit like something like this, right? Like pull your tanks out and rearrange it so you have like 4 light SP artillery on them, right? And this only has 144 light SP pieces, right? And like if you made a few 40 with light tank volunteer units, you might have 1,000 of these things in storage after you convert over to medium if you didn't lose them all. So you could make a few of these units with those light tanks that you convert over, and this will be soft attack competitive. See, 40 combat with the medium tanks and light SPGs. This will be pretty soft attack competitive with something like a 12A medium tank. Obviously your breakthrough and your armor is going to be a bit less, but if the AI is not piercing you, or they are piercing you and there's nothing you can do about it, then this will be adequate for the purpose if they don't have anti-tank for that armor. And like this is a significantly cheaper unit as well, right? 2,000 IC cheaper. So if you have those lying around and you want to find a use for them, and like particularly if you're on dispersed industry, like dispersed industry will give you a conversion speed bonus of 20%. And if you have like a lot of them, you could even get these 2 techs over here and really increase your conversion speed bonus. Like I'm not sure if I would commit this far, but especially if you're on dispersed industry anyways, and you could definitely convert those over and get modern SPGs to throw in your units, and that's that could be very cost effective to do that, right? The other trick that you can kind of do is like say you're on the heavy tank route, and again this is probably better for dispersed industry for these kind of tactics. But if you're trying to make like a really good tank unit or a couple really good tank units for the war starts, right? What you can do is you can start building production efficiency on a heavy tank 1 line. And where's the research screen here? Yeah, so you build up a bunch of production efficiency on a heavy tank 1 line. You start building a bunch of heavy tank 1s, right? And then when your research bonus finishes, if you're on dispersed industry, you also get a retention bonus, right? So you can take your heavy tank 1 line, convert it to heavy tank 2, and you'll get bonus retention on that because it's the same tier, it's like the same type of technology. It's a heavy tank. And then you'll get a bonus for having dispersed industry retention as well. So you hold production efficiency, and then you can go and make a new line and convert all these heavy tank 1s, which is like a 1934 technology, into heavy tank 2 SPGs or heavy tank 2 SPAA, which is a 1941 technology. And again, if you're on dispersed, it's pretty fast and cheap to do that conversion, right? So then you could do something like throw out a unit like this that has a couple heavy you'd have actually a bit less heavy tanks than this. Why isn't my width going? No, I was right. I was looking at the wrong place. Yeah, so this is correct. So you'd have 40 combat width, and you'd have like a unit like this, really high soft attack, and again, like you're getting these SP artillery for pennies on the dollar because you're converting them from stockpile, right? And you're going to get your unit in the field faster because this is this 6 combat width here. If you want to do pure heavy tank, would be replaced by 3 heavy tank battalions you'd have to build, and this is only going to cost you 48 units that you're converting. So it's definitely a viable tactic, right? And especially if you're on dispersed industry, that's something you can do, and that's going to help you with your production retention. And it's going to help you, if you're trying to rush a unit like that for the Weltkrieg. That sort of division design can help you get that in the field faster. And depending on how many of those you build, you could even go like, again, like we did with the light tanks, you just throw in a couple more. If you had a whole lot of the heavy SP artillery lying around that you built off those lines, you could do something. You do something like this, right? And again, you still have pretty high armor. Your breakthrough, that might be high enough, right? I mean, because you're also extremely hard. You have 58% hardness, so something like this might be okay. You might actually, something like that might be a little bit better. Take a little bit of ore kit to keep your breakthrough high, And again, something that you can convert these real fast. If you had those in your stockpile, so this is something you get in the field faster, and it's going to have really nice soft attack stat for you as well. It's like that's something you can do with the variants. Other stuff, so you have like the armored car template, and this is like hardness and suppression. That's what this is good for the cost. You can use these for early game breakthrough and in pushing and stuff like that. And like, I think they're like similar. Like to get a decent unit of armored cars is probably like a similar cost. Like in terms of you're going to have enough hardness and breakthrough to like push out a unit. But armored cars is kind of like a dead tech line, whereas light tanks lead you to. It's like if you go for light tanks as your breakthrough unit instead of the armored car, that leads you into medium tanks. Whereas if you go for armored cars, like, are they ever really going to want to build these things? I don't know. Like, probably not. Like, wouldn't it be interested more in tanks? If you're looking for like an early game aggressive unit, then like light tanks are probably the way you want to go for that. But if you start with light tank research, or if you start with armored car research anyways, the other thing you can do for them is like you grab yourself a military police thing and you throw a few armored cars in there, and then you can like use something like that for your like armored cars and armored, isn't it? No, it's immobile. So you can use something like that for your garrison. You're gonna have really nice suppression with this is a plus 30% suppression bonus. Like I guess the most efficient template would be like a 50 width armored car template with a military police, right? And then you'd be extremely hard, and your damage that you take from resistance is reduced by your hardness. It's soft damage, so that would be something like your rich yacht kid suppression template might be something like a 50 width armored car template with a military police. So something you could consider, but again, that's kind of like a niche technology. These things also do get like a speed buff in the desert, but their speed is already 12, and like I think if you're looking at your trucks, like trucks do not get a speed buff in the desert. So and again, like the armored car is not like these have like the same base stats as like a tank or something, but they're not really a base stat unit. Like Org 10 is like real low, HP 2 is real low. So if you're trying to take advantage of the speed buff, like I'm not even sure what you would stick in this unit to shore it up for the base stats, right? Because like you're already faster than trucks. And so it's got kind of that same problem where like the light tank 3 has, where a light tank 3 is 14 kilometers per hour, but the trucks can't keep up with it unless you're getting a bonus from somewhere else, like a doctor or something like that. So it's kind of pointless that speed is above 12 because nothing is going to be able to keep up with it, and these don't have the base stats to be viable combat units by themselves. But I guess if you're using it to stake victory points or something in the desert, like a 2 width armored car to just rush a victory point or something, might be worth considering. And then militia. I really don't like militia. Like, I mean, these have like the same manpower cost as an infantry unit, but they have like lower base stats. Like your HP is lower, your organization is lower, your soft attack stats are like considerably poorer, and so is your defense and your breakthrough. Right? Like there's the infantry for comparison. So, like there are things you can do with a militia, like where if you just need to throw at a bunch of cheap units, you don't want to spend a lot of guns doing it, and like you just need something to like not win combats, but like be essentially like a block of organization, like try and bubble wrap your from encirclements and like stuff like that, or just to slow people down. You can like spam a bunch of like small militia units, like those trash divisions you start with as Canada that are like a 6 width militia template, 3 militia, or even less. You can just go 2 width militia. And like the enemy is still going to have to shoot through and attack through for the organization to make those guys fall back and push them out of the way. And they're very cheap. Half the cost of like an infantry unit. So you can kind of do cheesy tactics like that with small militia. But in terms of like an actual combat purpose, like that's not really a serious combat template. And like some of those like 2 width template strategies are kind of cheesy. So I don't know. Like I'm not a huge fan of the militia. And if you have guns lying around anyways, like there's no point in using like a 20 width militia template and you're like, oh, I'm saving on guns for garrison. But you've got guns in stockpile anyways, so just give them to your guys, right? And again, it's like a poor use of manpower. Like the stats per manpower is like really bad for militia. So if you're manpower limited, you definitely do not want militia in the field. All right, so like in terms of like actual templates, we'll get into now. So like here's like your basic tank template that usually like a 12-8, something like that, throw in the field, and you can like bully the AI with this stuff, right? So 12-8, you could be heavy, you could be medium, and again, you're going to have more than enough breakthrough to get the job done, and you're going to have 30 organization, and like usually the target that I like to look for is around 30 org, or at least high 20s, and that'll keep your guys like in the fight long enough to push in. They're not going to fall back immediately after. They can stay in the fight for a while. That sort of thing. So that's like a good target to go for. Decent hit points, pretty high soft attack, and again, like with a hardness 65%, you look at like a 7-2 division the AI probably has, like the start of the Weltkrieg. And again, because your hardness is above 50%, like you're going to take less than half and half from this stuff, right? It's like this unit's going to do like maybe like 100, probably less attacks to your armored unit there with 600 breakthrough, right? So even if they have like 4 or 5 of these stacked up on a tile fighting against your tank unit, like your 12-8 tank unit, like that's still not going to beat your breakthrough. And like their piercing on something like this is like nowhere even close to beating the armor in this unit. And your soft attack at 403, more than enough to bully past the defense of a 300 defense unit, or even a 361 defense 10-0. Like you can beat that, especially if you have like a planning bonus, right? So it kind of forces them to like hide in terrain and stack units on tiles to try and counter. And even then, if you have multiple tank units like this, it's just really easy to smash through the AI and get encirclements and kill a bunch of stuff, right? If you saw my Germany campaign when we did the counterattack against France and the Romanians and whatnot, you can like kind of see the power of like having these units, especially a 1941 unit in like 1940, and you can just swat the AI aside and like kill all their stuff without too much difficulty very quickly. So that's kind of what you're looking for. Like if you're playing against like a human opponent, then you're gonna have to worry about the piercing game, and as you want to keep your armor higher than their piercing. But like I think like the most piercing I've ever seen an AI unit do is like, again, something like this. So if you're on the same tier, like they're piercing, like they might pierce a medium tank unit, but you're not going to scratch a heavy tank unit like that with the 59 piercing. It's not going to happen. So, and then, like comparison, right? It's like that's a 12-8, and depending on what your doctrine is, like if you have like mobile warfare, you can usually squeeze more tanks in there. Like you can even get down to something absurd, like only 2 motorized or mechanized infantry with mobile warfare, which, and again, you're going to have great combat stats, but when you go that low on your motorized, like even though you have the organization for mobile warfare, you will lose your hit points, right? And if you have a unit like that, that only has a few motorized and mechanized in it and like a whole bunch of tanks, like if you do get hit by CAS and other bombers, it's like it's going to hurt a lot in the amount of equipment that you lose. So something to keep in mind. But you can definitely do that with mobile warfare, and that kind of you can kind of see. I'll show you a 15.5 template later. But kind of anything between like a 12.8 and like a 15.5 would be like the standard range that you're looking for your ratio. And you can adjust that based on how much equipment you have in your stockpile and what your production's like. You definitely don't want to start moving your production around. You don't want to lose production efficiency. Production efficiency is king. Let's see here. Let's say 12.8 medium. Okay, 12.8 medium, 12.8 heavy. So 12.8 heavy, 12.8 medium. You notice like the soft attack is a little bit lower on the medium, but it's also substantially cheaper than the heavy, right? So it's much more cost effective per soft attack. It's also faster, and the breakthrough is similar. But the real difference is the heavy tank is going to have substantially more hard attack, and your heavy tank is going to have way more armor and piercing compared to your medium tank. Like this medium tank set up at 57.6 armor will get pierced by this unit that the AI could conceivably make. I see them do dumb shit all the time. But you have 1 line artillery, 1 support artillery, and like a 20 width or so. This one's 15, but like a small infantry unit. right? And that'll beat the 57 you have on your 12A medium. So like you gotta watch out. Once the AI starts being starts actually producing anti-tank, you might need to change your template a bit. And if that happens, what you'd want to do is like you'd pull some trucks out and you add like an extra medium tank. Now your armor's 60, so you're in the green, so you can like roll with this, right? That's something that you want to consider with your tank divisions. So this over here, like, and again, like the trucks with the heavy tanks. So trucks go 12 kilometers per hour, and heavy tanks only go 6. Calvary goes 6.4, right? So if you're like a really poor country and like you're at that point, you're like maybe I can't afford to spare a factory for trucks, or maybe I can't afford to have a research for trucks even. Like if you really want to get like a decent tank unit out for Well Creek 2, and you're going to put all your resources into doing that, and you just need every scrap you can scrounge together, then you can throw cavalry in there. And I mean, you will lose out on your hardness. Hardness is only 57 here compared to if you have trucks with the mech upgrade, your hardness is going to be 65. But otherwise your stats are very similar statistics for everything that matters. And to boot, you don't use any fuel, or sorry, you use significantly less fuel. You don't have to use fuel if you're motorized, right? The 62. This is 10 less fuel consumption there, and your supply use 4.56 versus I guess they use even more supply. That's surprising. I thought that would have been less. I thought it would have been less. But I guess horses got to eat, right? So you can do something like this, and it's not awful. And also like if you notice for the cavalry, they have much better movement modifiers than trucks do in a lot of terrain types. Like if you're going through jungles or forests. This is movement minus 24, but if you got the trucks, minus 44, right? So it's something you can consider if you're poor or you're worried about fuel or you can't afford trucks for whatever reason. Then you can use the cavalry, and it's not awful. But for me, usually when I'm building my tank template, like I'm probably building off the volunteer unit that I made that I sent to go fight in these wars, and that unit probably had motorized in it because it's based off a light tank template. In which case, I'm not going to bother paying the 40 army experience just to get like a little bit better movement in some terrain types. I'm not going to bother paying the experience to do that, to flip it over. I'll just build off that template, even if I am wasting some speed. Motorized isn't that expensive. Like a couple factories of motorized should hold you for like most of the game if you had them there from game start. And then infantry templates. So again, like the tanks, units with tanks, they've got really high soft attack. You're paying for that soft attack. They've got high soft attack, they got high breakthrough, and they're going to have that armor bonus, which makes them like very nice at attacking, particularly in open terrain. Infantry, on the other hand, like soft attack is like kind of okay, and you got pretty high defense for your cost, but not a whole lot of breakthrough. And you have pretty high organization and hit points in comparison, right? And no negative terrain modifiers. So these things are like more for line holding, right? If you try to attack with the infantry, your breakthrough is going to be lower than their attack most of the time, and you're going to get punished for that, right? So like a 10-0 is not going to be able to push out another 10-0. 7-2 even with 178 soft attack, breakthrough 56, like you're still not going to beat their defense. And they're going to hit back at you over your breakthrough, and then they're going to get that multiplier on a significant number of their attacks, and they're going to do way more damage to you than 178 attacks that are blocked. So 10-0 will bounce off a 7-2, 7-2 will bounce off a 10-0, and like you can't overcome the defender's advantage one-on-one with the infantry. You have to have something else. Like you could say, well, okay, so if that's how it works, I'll just grab 4 of these infantry units and gangbang 1 defending infantry unit. And now even if he has 4 times more damage in all of his attacks because he's getting past my breakthrough, I've got 4 times more attacks with him than also 4 times more organization, so I'll win that fight, right? And you will win that fight if you gangbang infantry 4-on-1, and depending on what the terrain modifier is like and whatnot, but. Kind of the problem with that mentality is that, like, if you look at, like, late game Kaiserreich, when the enemy AI is going to have, like, 8 divisions a tile or something silly like that, particularly if you have, like, a small front, like, between France and Germany, right? it doesn't matter how many infantry units you have together. Like, the enemy is always going to be able to match you combat width for combat width, and you're never going to be able to get that kind of stat advantage because the combat width won't allow it. Right? Like, you have 200 combat width, he has 200 combat width. It doesn't matter, right? Then now you're back to he has the same amount of stuff you do, but he has defender's advantage. You can't push. And that's kind of like where the advantage of tanks come in, right? So if you notice, like compared to like a 10-0, this is about 1,000. This is about 1,500. It's like you get 15 infantry units for like the cost of this one tank unit, right? But this tank unit for 40 combat width is going to have 400 soft attack and all this breakthrough and an armor bonus. Versus like if you doubled this up, like even on like a 14-4 or something like that, right? I mean, so your soft attack is not going to be as high, but you're also not going to have enough breakthrough to, you're not going to have enough breakthrough to defend yourself, so you can take more organization damage when you're attacking, and you're also not going to have an armor bonus, right? And that armor bonus for the extra 40% damage and half damage taken counts for a lot. It counts for a huge amount in your combat effectiveness, right? And again, your goal is to run the enemy out of organization before you run out of organization. Right, so this is going to get you more stuff, and because of all those bonuses, like the combat effectiveness per combat width on tanks is much higher than infantry. So if you have, for example, you have 160 combat width of tanks, it's going to crush 160 combat width of infantry, and so on and so forth, right? And like that's kind of the power of tanks. Unless those infantry have like extremely well designed like piercing anti-tank units and stuff like that, and even then it's questionable because if you're going to be able to get through heavies, like a heavy tank unit, like usually the thing that's going to contest a heavy tank unit is like another heavy tank unit. It's like pretty hard to do it otherwise. Like even if you look at it like a medium tank unit, like like this 12A medium tank, even if you went and you started throwing a tank destroyer in there, right, medium tank destroyer. Even like 2 medium tank destroyers, like the first one gets us to 75.2, and because like the rest of it's average after that, right? The consecutive additions of tank destroyers don't help that much. We're at 75.2 piercing with a tank destroyer, and like the heavy tanks are still at 79 armor, right? So like even this with like a medium tank destroyer is going to bounce off a heavy tank division. So it can be real tough to try and counter heavy tanks with anything that's also not a heavy tank. Not that matters with the AI. You don't have to play that game. I showed you that. Okay, it's like other units. Like this is like the same kind of concept, and kind of the reason why I like to roll with like the 12-8, even though it's like not as it's not going to get you as good stats as if you went with like a higher armor to mech ratio. But sometimes I like to swap out for Mountaineers or Amtraks or Marines or something like that. And if you swap out like that, like and again, like when you're going with like a Marine or a Mountaineer tank division, these all have like weird symbols for me. Sorry, it's taking me a while to like acquire them because like I had to make them look different, and like usually I would use a different symbol than this from Mountaineer tanks. So something like this, right? And like the reason you want 8 Mountaineers here is like because these terrain things that you're trying to mitigate are average stats. So if you only splash like 2 Mountaineer units in your tank unit, like you're not going to get barely any benefit. But if you have 8, then you start to get significant benefits, right? So if you're having problems pushing through a mountain tile or something like that, and you need to break through it, what you can do is replace your Motorized with Mountaineers. Your manpower cost is lower, so like the switch to Mountaineers happens very fast, and then when you switch back to Motorized, it recovers pretty quickly too. It's like it's not that much more manpower that you need to drive the treks. So you can, if you get to the mountain range, switch to like this template. It's only going to cost you some experience for your unit. Usually that doesn't matter. Sometimes it does. If you have like a veteran tank unit, like maybe then you don't want to switch. But otherwise, like it's usually not too painful to do this switch. So you switch to Mountaineers, break through the mountain tiles, and then like once you're through, you can switch back to your trucks on the other side. And with something like this, you're going to have higher organization because you're special forces. But like really the reason why you're doing this is like if you look at hills, attack -4, mountain attack -4, as opposed to like the truck unit. just going to have mountains minus 20 and hills minus 12. So, the difference between minus 4 and minus 20 can be pretty substantial, especially in a terrain type like mountains, which already has a base pretty high negative to your attack. And that can just make it a little bit easier to push. And the other thing with using Mountaineers is mountains are also going to have attrition. And trucks aren't that reliable. So if you swap those out for Mountaineers when you push, you're also not going to lose a ton of trucks to attrition. So that's something you can do, and that can help breaking through mountain tiles and make your life a lot easier in that situation. Then this is like an Amtrak tank. You can do the same thing with Marines, right? Marines will slow your unit down though, but if you use Amtraks and you've got heavy tanks and they don't slow you down at all, and if you use improved Amtraks and medium tanks, that won't slow you down at all either. So the Amtraks is something that you can just kind of leave in your tank unit all the time, and it's usually not too bad. They won't slow you down, and they still give you the same base stats as a mechanized unit for the most part. So that's great. And the Amtraks will help you with rivers and amphibious a lot, particularly with the amphibious. So if you look at the Amtrak tank, your amphibious modifier is going to be negative 34. And if you look at a regular 12A medium tank, your amphibious modifier is minus 56, right? So it's that's a medium tank. Amphibious minus 62 on the heavy tank, right? So heavy tanks with Amtraks, the benefit that you're going to have from having those Amtraks in it is significant. It's almost double. It almost reduces your terrain penalty by half, right? And then for the river, attack minus 12 on the heavy tank, and on the 12-8 normal tank, attack minus 28, right? So again, right, more than half the reduction in that penalty for using the Amtraks for rivers. And rivers and amphibious can be some of the hardest places to break through, to bully an enemy off a port to stick your naval invasion or to get across the river that they're defending. And the Amtraks really help out a lot for that. And additionally, because they're a mech unit, they're also extremely hard, and they don't have terrain penalties, right? It's your average terrain movement penalty is going to be lower because you're using Amtraks instead of motorized. It's in a jungle, you get minus 24. In jungle here, you get minus 44 with the trucks, right? So those are kind of the benefits for Amtraks, and it is a pain in the ass to go and have to ahead of time research this stuff because the Amtraks are a 1941 technology, so they're even more advanced than motorized. But those benefits are considerable. And even if your attack modifier is a little bit lower in a lot of terrain types, the Amtraks will help you where it counts. So you have Amtraks in your tank unit, you got General with Improv Expert, and no problem getting over rivers. So those are the Amtraks, and again, you could do the same thing with the Marines for amphibious landings or to get over rivers too if you don't have Amtraks. This is a 15-5 division. And again, the organization of this division is pretty low, but if you went with Mobile Warfare Doctrine or you're far enough down Superior Firepower Doctrine, those doctrines will fix this organization problem. And compared to a 12-8, again, you're going to have higher soft attacks, higher hard attacks, better breakthrough, and better armor and piercing compared to a 12-8. So if you can afford to fix your organization with your doctrines, like the Superior Firepower or particularly Mobile Warfare, you can go with a higher motorized to you can go with a higher motorized or tank to motorized ratio, and that is going to be reflected in your statistics. Of course, you have to pay for this stuff, and this is also using mechanized. But that is something you can do, right, with the 15.5. And again, this is also rich kid tier, but if you got the industry for it, then a unit like this is gonna have more impressive stats, especially if you have the organization fixer than you're a 12-8. And like I said again, a 13.7. A 13.7 is fine. 14.6 is fine. Right? Just whatever. You're trying to keep that organization number, you're trying to keep yourself from being pierced, and you're trying to get as high soft attack and as possible, right? And usually your breakthrough is high enough on this type of units versus the AI that doesn't matter. You'll be blocking everything. Particularly because the AI doesn't build stuff with like a lot of hard attack. But high soft attack, don't get pierced, and keep your orc reasonable. Like that's like the kind of the rule for these things. I already talked about the ones with the SPGs, and like this would be something like again, same deal with the AA. If you decided to build heavy tank 1, keep your production efficiency going for your switch to heavy tank 2, you can just convert them to AA, and then this will give you like pretty good protection from being bombed. You just replace 1 tank with 2 AA. Then something like this. Like this is like a Frankenstein division. This is like something that I would build. If you're fighting like an early Civil War or something like that, right? And like you wouldn't build necessarily this exact template, but the idea is that you'd start with something that you get like a basic bitch 18 width infantry template that everyone starts with, and then because you're poor, you're looking for a breakthrough unit, you don't really have the industry to build a proper tank division, but you can put maybe 1 or 2 factories on tanks, a couple factory, maybe 1 factory in artillery, 2 factories in artillery, like the rest on guns, maybe 1 on support equipment. But even like with 1 or 2 factories on tanks, right? And you'd start out with like your nine infantry battalions, and then like every piece of artillery that comes off that line, once you hit the threshold to add a battalion, you throw a battalion in. Every tank that comes off that line, once you hit 60 light tanks, throw a light tank battalion in. And you kind of build up from that, right? So like you might start out looking something like this, and then like as you start building more tanks, you'd like add on to this unit, more artillery to add on to this unit, and so on and so forth, right? And then this is going to get you, like eventually you're going to have like enough breakthrough, you're going to get armor, you're going to get your soft attack concentrated, and like you'll be able to, like something like this over here is going to be able to push out like a 7-2, right? You've got breakthrough 203, soft attack 264. You've got higher soft attack than them, and you've got enough breakthrough to block their soft attack, right? And like your organization is probably not that bad either on the Frankenstein unit. Yeah, so I mean this will when you've got the armor. So like something like this will like bully out a 7-2. So if you kind of concentrate all your tank production instead of trying to build a tank unit or trying to splash your tank somewhere else, you can just kind of concentrate all your arty and your tanks into 1 unit. Use this as your spearhead to break through the lines, and just use whatever trash units you get with your default templates to like fill in and pin and do other units like that. So I played the Spanish Civil War a few times, like each of the different factions, and like using a strategy like this, and that unit proved to work out pretty well for me, right? And you can either base it on like your standard template, or if you have Mountaineers in Spain are really good, so you can just add a tank onto your Mountaineer unit, and build it from there. Add artillery onto your Mountaineer unit, or if you have Calvary are a bit faster, so you can put your tanks into that. And but that's the general idea, right? So like if you put all your stuff into 1 of these units, you can use it as a spearhead, and that can help you out in your early conflicts. This isn't something you'd build for like Well Creek 2. This would just be like for your early wars. If you need a breakthrough unit and you can't afford a proper tank division, then you can do something like this. And this is the example of the Space Marine Division. And the Space Marine Division is like I talked about the tank destroyer that's can have full armor. It's also gonna be cheaper than a heavy tank unit, and because armor is based off, you get that initial splash just from having a high armor unit. You can get armor 36.8 just by investing 1 tank destroyer battalion into this unit. And if the AI has no anti-tank, then you're gonna get the armor bonus. They can't pierce you, and you're gonna fight a lot better than like a 4-4 without it. Right. If you notice this compared to a 4-4, like this is like about 20% more expensive. But if you have the armor deflection bonus, you're going to fight a lot better than 20% on the field. The problem is, like aside from hard attack and piercing, and like again, those aren't the greatest stats to have versus the AI. You're not really getting anything from the cost of that tank stat-wise. So if the AI starts to build units like with the supporting anti-tank in them, like even like an AI, like if they build like a 7-2, I think it's usually what they build now. Right, this is going to have the supporting anti-tank on the equivalent tiers. Like once you're off ahead of time for your tank destroyers, the AI with like a supporting anti-tank will pierce your Space Marine division. And then you're not getting a whole lot of value for that tank destroyer. Another thing you can do too is if you can pay the extra cost and just put like an actual proper heavy tank in there. and then that'll get you some breakthrough too. So like even if you're pierced, you'll still get some breakthrough to reduce incoming damage. And, it's even better if you get 2. But then again, now you're getting up there in cost. Or like this is like twice as expensive as a 14-4. But you get breakthrough. It's like those are things you can do, and like that's the concept behind the Space Marine template. The other thing about the Space Marine template that is kind of a plus is that like because it's a predominantly infantry template, your terrain modifiers are all like pretty good. Like you're barely taking any penalties in most of these terrain. And like you have a decent soft attack from the artillery, so something like this is like extremely cost effective for like pushing into like difficult terrain types. It won't be fast because you don't have like the mech, but in terms of like your soft attack penalties, like this will bring the attack in rough terrain. It'll bring the attack, and if the AI doesn't have anti-tank, it'll also bring the armor bonus. So like this is like a pretty cost effective unit for that situation. Kind of like the only hang up to that though is like even if you have like 100% reliability on your equipment, you still take a base loss per equipment type. So like having like a really tiny number of tank destroyers, they'll still be subject to that minimum base attrition in a lot of those terrain types. And you can wind up losing like a disproportionately large number of tank destroyers if you're fighting in terrain that causes attrition because of that. And that's also like a unit that has like SPGs, SPAA, mechanized, motorized in your support companies, and regular tanks is going to lose a lot more equipment to attrition than a unit that's just like, if you look at the Mountaineer tanks we had there, it's going to lose a lot more equipment than something like this, which is just infantry equipment and heavy tanks. Like a lot more industrial production cost of value. Right, because then you're losing, even if everything's 100%, you're losing the base on SPGs, you're losing the base on tanks, you're losing the base on SPAA, you're losing the base on motorized, you're losing the base on support equipment, you're losing the base on your mech. So something to consider. Like simple units, if you're going to be taking a lot of attrition, are going to lose less industrial production worth of stuff. Other stuff, like the 14-4, this is like, if you needed a stronger infantry unit, then this is just a 7-2 times 2. And like, a similar unit would just be the 10-0 times 2, or the 20-0. And if you need to attack something, these will be a bit more effective because they've got concentration of attack and breakthrough. On the defense, it's like a bit of a flip. I mean, if the enemy is attacking you with stuff that's going to enough stuff that it's going to exceed this defense value, then it might be better to defend with a 40 width. But otherwise, 2 of these units are going to have more organization, and you can also pull one back, have it recover organization, and send it back to reinforce. And you can do like org wall a lot easier with if you have more units as opposed to single larger units on the defense. So I usually don't bother with 40 width infantry. But now that there's a division cap, maybe 40 width is something that might be more powerful. But certainly, if you're going to try to make offensive plays with infantry and attack with infantry, then you're going to have an easier time doing it if you have the larger units. So 14-4, 20-0, probably fine, right, on defense. Other stuff. You get a truck unit in here somewhere. Yeah, so like if you're gonna use motorized, like I used to play, like when I started playing Hearts Iron 4, like I used to build like a bunch of these units and have them follow my tanks around and like try to make encirclements and stuff like that. But I found like these guys are gonna use like they're gonna use fuel, and like they're pretty supply intensive too. Like, and especially when you make a breakthrough, even in urban areas, like if you make a breakthrough and your tanks are going in with your spearhead, you don't necessarily get a whole lot of supply into the province you just broke into. You don't have a lot of control of leading edge and so on. So I found that like sending these guys in after kind of starved my tanks of fuel a lot of the time, and I had to pull them back out to keep on going. And so I kind of soured on them a little bit, and they're also like, compared to an infantry unit, they're going to be twice as expensive. Come down here, like a 10-0 over here, even with support companies, is like 1046 for a 20 width, and motorized is like even more expensive for only a 10 width. But these guys are very fast, right? So if you do make a breakthrough with your tanks, you can send these guys out. They can help make encirclements. They can help snake victory points. They can help get overruns for kills, right? Like if the enemy is trying to retreat, you just drive motorized to the trial they're trying to retreat through, and you can overrun them. Particularly if you have heavy tanks, you don't have any speed, then maybe you could consider getting a couple of these. I usually don't find it necessary, but if you have extra trucks lying around and you just want to capitulate someone fast, Blitzkrieg style, then you have a swarm of these guys go through after you make your break and just snake all the victory points. And if they run into trouble, it's not that bad if you lose them. Like, they're still not that expensive. It's the same cost as an infantry unit. And, they do have decent organization, especially if you're on mobile warfare, to, hold out for a while to go out and try and help them out. So that's that. You could do a similar thing with cavalry, but with cavalry, the 10 with cavalry is not so much for, grabbing victory points and stuff. But if you're trying to do that strategy where you defend, you pull your units back, let them recover org behind, and you send them back in to keep up that infinite wall of organization. Cavalry can be pretty cancerous at doing that because they move a bit faster than infantry do. So they reinforce and they'll get to the tile on the front faster than infantry walking over. So they also have higher organization in general at 70. So if you're trying to do the org wall defense, you've got the guns and the supply to build cavalry units. The cavalry, a 10 with cavalry unit could be really cancerous to deal with, really fucking awful to fight. For the AI to fight, or even a player, I imagine probably be annoyed by it. When you're doing the 10 with cavalry organization wall micro. So there's that. That unit would have value. And also let's talk about some support companies for a bit, right? So what support company should you pick? Well, that's going to depend, right? But if you look at your, I already talked a little bit about the support artillery and whatnot, but if you look at what a support company will do to your unit, all this stuff is going to screw over your armor. Most of it, the AA will help your piercing, right? But most of it will fuck over your armor and your piercing. It's we know, you talked about how, or we talked about how, if you're doing medium tanks, the AI will sometimes build a unit that's capable of piercing you. Well, you gotta be careful when you start adding in a ton of support companies, because that can start to chip away at your armor. It's let's do engineers, get a recon, get logistics, get some signals. Get ourselves, I don't know, what else do we want here? I guess all the support artillery, right? So now our armor is 50.8. Right, and previously it was 57.6. So yeah. So it's that is a substantial difference, right? So you got to be careful, especially with your tank units. If you're no longer ahead of time and the AI is starting to pierce you, you got to think to yourself, am I using too many support companies? Maybe you are, and maybe the way you fix that and you start to not be pierced is you're well, maybe I don't really need all that shit. I can live with just engineers, right? Now you're at armor 55.9. And this is at, still not going to be enough in this case, right? But I know you don't want to switch your ratio, but that is something you got to watch out with your support companies. First of all, is that they will chip away your armor and your piercing. Otherwise, supporting anti-tank, this is a pretty cost-effective way to bump your piercing. This is a pretty cost-effective way to bump your soft attack. This is pretty cost-effective for anti-air, for that stuff. And the rocket artillery, like I said, if you're on that superior fire doctrine, rocket artillery is going to help you double dip on that soft attack bonus that you get. Engineers give you entrenchment, and engineers will also give you, depending on the level of engineer company that you have, this is going to give you, I guess it's probably easier to look at these in the research menu. With engineers, this will give you fort, attack and defense bonus, and fortress. This will give you a river, attack and defense bonus. Remember, tanks have problems with rivers, so you need to get across the river. Engineers help. This level gives you urban. Level 1 gives you a bunch of movement and defense, and a whole bunch of terrain types, and it gives you fort attack as well, and amphibious attack. Also, if you do a naval invasions, you want engineers. Engineers is probably the strongest support company. It's pretty much always conceivable that you're going to be attacked, and having better entrenchment is going to be great for that. And then also again, movement movement, defense, and attack buffs for like a bunch of terrain types. So they are a bit expensive of a support company, but like extremely powerful, right? Like if you're going to pick a support company to throw in anything, probably you're going to want to throw in engineers. Recon, we already talked about like the reconnaissance, but one level of recon will also get you a movement buff in most terrain types. So if you need your unit to be fast, then you throw a recon company in there, and recon is also very cheap. So it's not usually a costing that you're worried about for that. And like if you upgrade it, like getting an edge on tactics can be pretty nice. So that's recon, but I would mostly put that in stuff that I'm concerned about going fast with. And like maybe on your offensive units, like your tanks, if you're only going to be attacking with tanks, you get this recon bonus, and that'll help your general counter the enemy's tactics. MP is only really useful for your garrison template. Maintenance, like mainly you're taking it to increase your reliability. You don't really need reliability greater than 95% on most things. I think guns are reliability 90. And your tank, if you upgraded your variant, then they could have reliability 90 as well, or higher. Your mech and your moat, though, their reliability is pretty low. Reliability 80 on Trex, and reliability 80 on mechanized. So unless you have a designer, like let's look at our boy Carl here. Does Hunger get anything? Yeah, this is production cost, but sometimes you'll get a designer that increases your reliability. But if you're just on guns and you have a reliability variant 90 tank, then you only really need one level of maintenance company. If you're going to go with mech, then 3 levels will get you up to 95. And they also give you some equipment capture. Again, that's usually not the reason why you take it, but the higher level you go, the more equipment capture you get. And if you're fighting in rough terrain with expensive stuff, then yeah, sure, maybe 3 levels of maintenance company, maybe you do need something like that to stop you from breaking your Amtraks and your mechanized. I think artillery has pretty bad reliability. Reliability 80, that's not terrible. It's like the same as mech. So that's your maintenance company. Field hospital, we already talked about that. It does what it does, but it's really expensive, right? This is I think the same cost as engineers plus a motorized tax on top of that. And logistics will help you out substantially with your supply and fuel usage. So you would take this if you're worried about supplies or you're worried about fuel consumption. Particularly for naval invasions, overseas landing forces, this can be pretty helpful. You don't always have the best supply when you just capture a port if it's not a high level or something like that. So having logistics in your invasion units can be nice. And signals is really important because it's going to get you that reinforce rate, especially if you're playing with the AI or you're playing on the defense. It's always heartbreaking to have your tank unit get to the tile, but it can't pass its reinforce rate to defend, and your infantry lose the combat before your tank unit even gets in. You get pushed off. That always sucks to happen, so having signals will help with that. Extremely important for your big units that are moving around to have signals if you can afford it. And also it gives you reinforce rate, which is helpful for your org wall defense. If you can afford that for your infantry units, if you're more manpower than industry constrained, then yeah, you can put signals in that. It'll help. But mostly this is something you want to put in your tanks. And with the AI, if you attack a tile and the AI is attacking tile and you get stuck in reserve, that always sucks. But if you have signals companies, that'll help you get in the fight faster. So really important for tanks to get that if you can afford it. But that's basically it for support companies. And if you look at your tank units, right? When you're deciding what support companies to pick for your offensive units, which is really the important ones, right? Something like logistics, it gives you a little bit of hit points, but it's also going to, otherwise it's just a straight stat drop, right? So there's no point in throwing logistics in a bunch of things if you're not going to need logistics. It's just lowering your stats and you're paying for it, right? So like usually when I go and I'm doing invasions, I'll like find like my template and I'll like duplicate this. I'll add logistics to this template. Well, I like to use a little palm tree because these guys are like on vacation, like overseas, right? And like I'll convert my invasion force over to have this instead of standard 10-0, and I'll leave like the rest of my army the same, right? It's like the only guys who get logistics are the guys who are going to conceivably need logistics. Same with the tank unit. Like you can add them to your tank unit, you need logistics, and once you're done with your overseas campaign, and you're going to have to go fight another war in normal terrain and normal supply, then probably you want to pull logistics out just to get your stats back. That's you just gotta check to see what it does to your unit, right? Like sometimes they'll help. Like Calvary has stats. I think the tanks and the trucks do too. They'll give you a little bit more of a bonus. But the main thing is that they can deplete your organization and they can deplete your armor and your piercing in a lot of these companies. So you gotta watch out for that. Like don't throw something in your unit that you're not gonna need. And again, if you have the doctrine over here where you want integrated support, like if you notice, like a lot of those support companies are causing us to have like a negative organization. This will give you plus 20 organization on your support companies. So like some of them even give you a positive at that point, but you can have like a bunch of support companies and it's not going to like really seriously deplete your organization. Whereas like without that buff, like we're at org 30 now, and if you stack like 5 maintenance companies on, you're down to org 27.6, right? So something to consider. And I think that's like pretty much everything I had that I wanted to say about template design or whatnot. Yeah, if you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave one. And otherwise, this is Levy Freeman signing out. Have a good one.